So, hello and welcome to a special book talk series about the International Dublin Writers Festival. I'm Sabrina, and I'll be hosting this mini series and giving you a sneak peek into the festival events we have lined up for September. And I'm so excited to introduce Daragh Fleming. So, welcome and thank you so much for being here today. For our audience, Daragh is one of our special guest speakers at the festival this year, and he's here to tell us about himself and what he will talk about in September. So, Daragh, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself? So, like your name. Well, I've already said that multiple times, but you can say it again. Pronouns, where you're from, and most importantly, what your favorite book is, or maybe poetry series, and why.
Cool. Yeah, this is always the hardest question to ask or to
Yeah.
answer because it's kind of the same when someone asks you what your book's about. It's just really hard to summarize. But yeah, my name's Daragh. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm a mental health writer, author, poet. And at the festival, I'll probably be talking about most likely Lonely Boy, which is my debut nonfiction. It's a collection of essays on mental health. So I've been writing in mental health for about 9 years. Then after that, started writing short fiction. So I have a collection of short stories as well. And I've been writing poetry kind of the whole time. I've always used poetry as a kind of a way to understand my own emotion, because when I was in my early 20s, like I was very depressed and I found it very difficult to feel any emotion. So when I was coming out at the end of that, poetry helped me to kind of, I suppose, kindle the fire of any emotion that was coming up, and it allowed me to really feel it more strongly, and it's been really helpful. And then some of my friends who are actual poets said you could try and get some of this poetry published, and I tried and was luckily successful in that. And we have a collection of poetry coming out in October called Enigmatic. So a lot of different things going on, but basically, to summarize myself, I'm really passionate about mental health and I really like writing things down. So that's my thing.
Nice. That all sounds. I'm so excited about Enigmatic, because I'm a poetry lover. At heart, I can't write it. I've tried, not my jam. I wish it was, but
I'm
I'm
sure you
excited to
could.
read
I'm
it.
sure you could.
I mean, we'll see. I've taken some classes and the professors are like, "This is good. Stop writing about your grandma." And I'm like, "Okay, fine, fine."
But
Um,
I think every poet really gets into a niche of what they write about. Like I have a friend, Wendy Allen, who's an incredible poet, and she writes a lot about like the menstrual cycle and menopause. And I have another friend, Molly, and she writes a lot about like experience with eating disorders. So I think we all, it's typically the thing that's most painful in your life that you write about as a poet. Like I always joke, like poets find it very difficult to write happy poems because it's where the pain is where we kind of find a connection with other people, I guess. So
yeah,
everyone just has their really specific niche, and some people won't get that, but they're just not your people. So keep writing about
true.
your grandmother. Do it.
Maybe I will. Um, cool. So I guess since we're talking about poetry and stuff like that, are you reading anything good right now? Like, do you have anything that you're drawing inspiration from?
Yeah, at the moment, like I really I do like to support a lot of Irish and UK poets that I know personally. So the ones I mentioned, Wendy Allen, Molly Toomey, Luke Morgan, Gali Admani, she's a great poet from London. But my favorite poetry collection ever, I would say, is Considerations in an Emergency by Frank O'Hara. I've
Mhm.
just always really loved that. It's just when you read it, you really get an idea of how New York was in the 60s and 50s, and it's just really visceral. So I always find myself coming back to different parts of that. Um, but other than that, like when I'm writing poetry, I tend to not read that much poetry because I don't want to
Mhm.
get caught in a place where I'm like just mimicking other poets, which tends to happen if you're just reading a lot of it, that you're like, oh, I like that, or I like how they phrase that. So I try to keep away, but it's hard. And I am working on a pamphlet at the moment called The Hole, which was very much came about when I went to see Max Porter in Cork. He's a really, really prolific and amazing writer from the UK, and he came to Cork and did a reading. And the next morning I woke up and I just had this huge poem in my head, and I just started writing it down.
Wow.
And we're at like 29 pages at the moment, so it'll definitely need to be change because it pretty much is all just one poem. But yeah, so like it kind of comes in spurts. You don't really know. I think poetry in particular as a genre, it's not something I sit down and force myself to write. Like when I was writing Lonely Boy, I made myself write for an hour every day, but poetry is far
Mhm.
more instinctive and impulsive. And when the poem comes, that's when you kind of have to work at it, you know?
Yeah. So you really do I feel like you tackle a lot of different genres of writing because you've got Lonely Boy, which is essays, and
Mhm.
then like Thoughts Too Big, and you've got Enigmatic. So like could you talk a little bit more about your process? Does that switch up like a lot between projects? And what's that experience like?
Yeah, it can be interesting because I'll have an idea for something, like it'll just be like, here's a topic we can explore. And often I'll start with a poem because that's kind of the most raw connection I'll have with the writing because it's just really instinctive. And then oftentimes it might just be like, okay, this is okay as a poem, but it might work better as an essay because you can really explore what the topic you're talking about. Or then other
Mhm.
times I'll have an essay that's paired with a poem. But so like it kind of just depends. I'll get the idea and then I'll have to figure out my own where it'll fit best. Like, because sometimes you might have I might have an idea about I want to write an essay about anxiety, but it might be more powerful and connect with other people more if I write it as a piece of fiction and use a metaphor to explain what anxiety feels like, which I've done.
Mhm.
So it just kind of depends, but typically if I have, like, say with Lonely Boy, I knew I wanted to write a book about of essays about mental health, so that process got far more strict because once I had the kind of, I suppose, the content subjects, then I had to just write it, which meant just a lot of hours at the computer. So with that, it was far more like disciplined and sit down every day and write for a couple of hours and do it the next day and next day. But when I'm in a, like, I suppose right now I'm in a place of like idea generation, so it'll just
Mhm.
be a lot of reading at the moment. And then I think what's really important for writers that's often missed is you just kind of have to live your life, because often the ideas I get come from when I'm out for a walk or I'm meeting a friend for coffee or I'm traveling. The idea will come then, and then I'll come back to the computer and be like, okay, is this a poem? Is it an essay? Is it a short story? And
Right.
we'll stare into it again. And that's kind of the process. It is a lot of living your life and experiencing different things and then allowing that to percolate into an idea for something.
Mhm. Oh wow, that's great. I feel like that's the one piece of advice like no one ever really gives. So like I feel like I hear a lot of sit down, write for,
Mhm.
30 minutes every day, which is all great, but no one's ever like go do your thing because
Yeah, well,
that's
I think to write an interesting book, you kind of have to lead an interesting life. For the language, especially to come alive. And although it is important to try and write every day, I don't like the prescriptive model of like, if you don't write every day, then you're not a writer, because some days you're probably better, because it say for me, if I'm very much forcing it and I don't not really in the headspace to write, the writing sucks because
yeah.
I'm just like, oh, I'm just making myself do this. But like that can be good. Like sometimes I'll do that if I have like literally no ideas. I'll just do some journaling exercises where I write down the first thing that comes into my head, and then the next thing might be a memory, and then maybe those two things can connect to make this new fictional short story. I've done stuff like that before, but typically it's like, if I'm feeling it, then I'll write, but I don't force myself, because that just, for me anyway, it just works against the creative process. You're really forcing the issue that rather than letting it flow through you.
Yeah. Well, cool. I was just thinking about when we were this is completely off topic, but I was thinking about you mentioned you've got Enigmatic coming up, but also you said you had an autofiction novel coming up. Could you like share a little about those? Because I was getting really
Yeah,
excited. And then I
sure.
got distracted by the writing process, which is also really cool.
Yeah, so Enigmatic is my first collection coming out with Sunday Morning at the River. So I think that's in and around 40 poems that I've been working on for the last year and a half, 2 years. So
Mhm.
I did a poetry pamphlet with Dark 30 Poetry last year called Poems That Were Written on Trains But Weren't Written About Trains. And that poetry pamphlet coincides with the same timeline as the autofiction novel. So the autofiction novel is
Mhm.
based loosely on, I went traveling on my own for 3 months around Europe at the end of 2021.
Oh, that's
Uh,
so fun.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and a lot of things happened. And the story of the book is essentially more or less akin to what happened to me, in that I met someone while I was traveling. She was also traveling. We fell in love. We fell out of love. There was, because we were both traveling in different directions and kind of reconnecting in
Mhm.
different spots. So it's kind of about that story in my life, as is poems that are written on trains. So the autofiction novel is a new way of writing for me, because it's based on fact, but it's fictionalized, and
Right.
each chapter is the name of a city I find myself in, and the book focuses more on the people in the city rather than the city itself. So it's not like a typical travel book where, like, you talk about all the sites and where you
Mhm.
can go to eat and all that. Like, it's far more about like the individual people I met in those cities, and how they kind of affected me. And I suppose the whole journey of the book is, you know, I suppose I was lost before I went traveling, and by meeting new people and understanding that there's 1,000 different ways to live, and no one way is the right way to live. When I come back home at the end of the book, I'm kind of filled with this idea of that, like, I don't have to live in this prescribed way that's seen as normal, which is go to college, get the job, get the mortgage, get married. You can live in a million different ways, and that's kind of the message of the book. So it's been really fun to write, but it's been challenging. But I'm looking forward to hopefully getting it out into the universe in the next year or so. That's the plan.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds so cool. I mean, I think travel is one of the most interesting ways that you can discover yourself and especially other people. Like there's something so intimate about like finding yourself in a new place and then having to like adjust and
Mhm.
see, you know, who you could be, who you want to be in a new place. Anyway,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's yeah.
100%. And yeah, really, because I was basically like every 4 days I was moving to a new spot. So you're kind of restarting every 4 days.
Hmm.
And yeah, just depending on the people you meet, it really sculpts your experience of a place. Because of like places or whatever, I've always found like it's really the people that either enhance or destroy an experience depending on
Yeah.
what situation you're in. So I think that's kind of the message of the book, is that it's really about the people you surround yourself with. It is how you're either going to enjoy or feel sad in a situation. And traveling is really I suppose, the baptism of fire. If you go traveling on your own, you have no choice but to meet new people, and
Yeah.
to like just accept the kind of chaos of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, which is always challenging.
Yeah, no, your options really are just like be by yourself and reflect on yourself or meet new people, and
Yeah,
both are hard.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Um, cool. So I guess my last thing is, could you give us, I know you mentioned you were going to talk about Lonely Boy at the festival this September. Could you just give us like a sneak peek about what specifically you're going to talk about?
Yeah, I think like some of the most prominent feedback I've gotten from Lonely Boy is that it's incredibly honest, because it talks a lot about my own mental health, and as a result of like my own, say, um, the hand I played in my mental health becoming poor, and maybe the responsibility I wasn't taking for my mental health. So
Mhm.
a lot of parts of the book, I'm not painted as a very good person. My behavior due to my mental health wasn't fantastic. There are a lot of things I regret. There's just bad decisions. And I remember when we were editing the book with Book Club Publishing, there was a conversation around, oh, we can cut out the parts of the book that don't make you look really like a nice person. And I remember one of my favorite authors before, Rob Doyle, said that there's no point in writing if it's not going to be honest. Because if I cut
Mhm.
out all the bad parts, then it's just kind of the book becomes a vanity project of me being like, my mental health was bad, but I was still a fantastic person the whole time, which wasn't true. And I think the important thing about mental health writing is that you're giving the whole journey. So it goes from dealing with depression, suicide ideation, anxiety, lost a friend to suicide. Then I started drinking, was doing drugs, was using sex as self-care. And all that stuff is part of the journey to get me to where I am now. So it is important to include. So I think at the festival, I'll really be talking about how it's important to be honest in your work. Even, it can, look, like for me, thankfully, it hasn't come to my own detriment. Like there's been no negative repercussions, but like, you are taking a risk in that, like when you're super honest, there's the risk that some people who are close to you mightn't look at you the same way or mightn't feel about you the
Mhm.
same way. But I think a book like Lonely Boy doesn't have the same impact without that honesty. So I will be talking a lot about honesty in writing and how you can still write about real situations without, I suppose, throwing other people under the bus. Because what I'd
Mhm.
never wanted to do was like point the finger and blame other people, even if they were interacting with me, and as a result of that interaction, my mental health took a nosedive. You can be honest without like shaming someone else or naming them or all that kind of thing. So it's the nuance of being honest without being, I suppose, like purposefully hurtful to other people. There's a nuance to that, and it's important. So that I think that's what I'll be talking about at the festival.
Gosh, that sounds fantastic. I mean, honestly, I mean, of all the things that I've been hearing about, I feel like that's one of the most important lessons that you could be talking about is honesty.
Yeah.
Because I know there have been so many stories where I've read and I've been like, okay, what was the point? Like,
Yeah.
why? So this was like 300 pages of you hyping yourself up
Mhm.
for what? So I think I don't know. I'm really excited to hear more at the festival. And I think
Always a good
everyone's
sign.
going to benefit. Yeah, no, it's going to be great. Um, so cool. Those were all the questions that I have, and I think that's all the time that we have for today. But I mean, thank you again so much for joining me on my little podcast. Um, yeah.
And thanks a million for having me on. It's always great to be able to talk about the writing, so I appreciate it.
So, this brings us to the end of our time today on Book Talk. But if you're interested in attending the International Dublin Writers Festival and listening to Dara's talk, it will be running from September 15th to 17th at the Academy Plaza Hotel in Dublin. And if you can't attend in person but still want to listen in and learn, we have online sessions available. So please go to internationaldublinwritersfestival.com for more information. And tune in to our next episode for a chat with Paul Carroll. Bye for now.